Hello, and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and we're very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have with us Catherine Ingram, who is the author of this book, Passionate Presence. And Catherine goes around the world actually teaching. She conducts Dharma dialogues wherever she goes, all over Europe, Asia, the United States, and sits in a room and very simply speaks with people about the nature of self and the nature of being, which is what this book is about. And I encourage you to get it and take a look at it for yourselves and connect to the energy that's within it. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Mitchell.
Good to see you.
Wonderful to see you.
Good to have you. So, first of all, what is it that everyone gets involved in sort of a spiritual endeavor or path for different reasons? Mm-hmm. It may have some underlying similarity, but what
Hoping
was it
to feel
for
better.
You? Yeah, right, exactly.
Hoping to get out of suffering.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Was that what it was for you?
That was what it was for me, yeah. I would say it was to try to come to terms with the kind of suffering that I was feeling through my, young adulthood, having had a very difficult childhood, and wanting to make sense of life and of this world.
Were you raised within a particular religious tradition?
Not exactly, no. My grandmother was Catholic, but she died when I was 7. And then my parents were really not very religious. So when I was about 12, I came upon the notion of agnosticism, which simply means don't know.
Sure.
And that made a lot of sense to me. So I thought for a while I was an agnostic.
Yeah, you had a group to belong to.
Yes, I had a label, and but it didn't have much in the way of explanation of anything,
Right.
So I kept going, kept seeking. I didn't ever really particularly connect with Christianity as a form. Mm-hmm. And I began to study more in the Asian traditions in my later teens, having read Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and I was very influenced by that. And
many were of that generation.
It sold 1 million copies.
Yeah.
And at the end of Be Here Now, there was a book list, a suggested reading list that he had put together. And I went out and got every single book on that book list.
Really?
And read most of them. Some of them didn't quite click, but I read almost all of them. So, and that launched me into this whole, again, seeking more of a teacher to really train with, which a process that eventually led me to Naropa Institute in 1974, where a host of, an incredible roster of teachers were there, and I met my first teacher, Buddhist teacher, began practicing Buddhist meditation, which I did for 17 years, and helped start a center and helped set up retreats around the world. In the Vipassana training, yes. Mm-hmm. And
that teacher was Joseph Goldstein?
That was Joseph Goldstein, wonderful, wonderful teacher.
A good Jewish Buddhist.
Yes, the Buddhist order we call
it.
And then after a long time of practice, though, I came to a point of discontent. And things weren't making sense in a way, and practice began to fall away. The notion of practice began to fall away.
But for a while, I gather that it provided you with some sense of meaning,
yes,
with some sense of purpose,
community,
connectedness,
yes,
to community, but also to life itself.
Yes,
is that so?
Oh, very much so. It was definitely a rich and beautiful time. Those many years of being with my Buddhist crowd and training in wonderful places, often in Asia, just living a life in which we considered these things on a daily basis.
Sure.
And often we're in deep, quiet retreat. So that was wonderful. But
now,
then,
within that context, though, was there a sense of a direction of it relative to the idea of samadhi or nirvana or full awakening?
There was definitely an emphasis on progressing on the path.
Yes. Okay.
And this became more and more problematic for me.
And yet, within it, and within the teachings of, the Buddhist traditions, there's this idea that wakeful mind is with us all the time.
Yes, it's a paradox,
And there's
isn't
like,
it?
right, nowhere to go, nowhere
Right.
to progress, in fact.
Right.
Right?
Which is much more appealing to me.
Yes, I gather. That's why I was just outlining this.
Yes.
And so within the structure, it's a strange thing to say because we are the living teaching anyway.
Yes.
So there isn't some kind of church you go to and belong to. It's yourself,
Yes.
even so-called within the discipline.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But within whatever community you were in, I'm gathering that you did not connect to that idea of this is it.
Well, that wasn't so much emphasized, actually. That we were very much in a progressive, you keep practicing, certain negative mind states will eventually fall away. Well, they weren't falling away. In fact, the more that I looked at them, the worse they seemed to be because they were so clear.
Right. Unfiltered.
Right, exactly. There was no distraction from them. So I became very discouraged, and kind of all notion of spiritual practice just fell away, and it began to look like my father had always said, like a big waste of time. Unfortunately, I was unfit for the world at this point. I really didn't feel that I could just go out and just try to, play the power game or the money game or the romance game or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah.
It was as though I had just seen too much, and I fell into depression. And, during this period, if I went into a grocery store and there were just normal people about in that, which there usually would be, in Marin County where I was living at the time, I couldn't be in there for 5 minutes. I would have to just leave without the groceries. I just felt like an alien in this world because the Dharma had been my life, and now that wasn't so much, appealing to me, or I wasn't connected to whatever I had known, and I didn't feel that I fit in the ordinary kind of
the day-to-day.
The day-to-day, the progressive game of get more, have more, be somebody, all those things. I had no interest in that either. So
you were too progressed along the path.
well, I had deconstructed so much,
Sure, exactly.
that some part of me
didn't hold meaning.
right, and some part of me knew that I was not going to be relaxed in any of those games because they all looked very temporary and fraught with, all kinds of problems. So at this point, I then began. After this 2-year depression, there was an openness. I think depression can lead you either into madness or into a whole radical shift. And there was this openness, and I began to hear about a teacher in India named Punjaji, very unusual Indian teacher, who really was just offering his own direct life experience, really without a teaching per se. But what his message was that there's nothing to seek and nothing to do and nothing to get, and really just relax into this sweet taste of true self or true nature. Relax into it. Relax into what is right now here with no improvement. And when I went and met him and sat in front of him, his confidence in that relaxed sense of presence was contagious. He had been relaxed like that a really long time, so it was just contagious. The certainty that he had, and the way that it exuded in everything he said and did, and that was the turning point. Out of this depression and into really what I would call the truly mystical experience of life, where you are sitting comfortably in your own skin, in your own self, and you're feeling a connectedness to all that you feel in sitting here right now, a connection to your own self, Self unto self, he used to call it. Not Mitchell and Catherine so much, but self unto self. Even though Mitchell and Catherine are honored and coexisting and are in conversation. But that really it's the underlying feeling of being and belonging, which you feel more strongly when you're sitting in the center of your being, when that's where you're hanging out. And that's what then you begin to feel and notice in every other thing. Even if you're looking in the eyes of reptiles, you see it there, shining.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and in anything.
In fact, they're more composed than many people.
But often people might feel a kind of alienness,
Yeah.
you know. That would be a typical natural response, a biological response. Your biology will tell you probably to run away. But in fact, another, and that might be appropriate in many cases,
Right.
but another coexisting awareness can be going on which doesn't see any alienness necessarily.
But sensing being.
Yes, sensing being, exactly, right. And sensing
And
being.
animals, interestingly, are an incredible
Yeah,
expression.
Yes,
Natural
beautiful
expression of
expression.
it, you know?
Yes, yes.
Because what do? I mean, they're hanging out.
Yes.
You know?
Well, like I said the other night at the session, you know, the quote I had started the thing with was, "I hoped someday to become the person my dog thinks I am." And I was pointing out that maybe the dog is actually seeing the real you know, right now, not someday, but actually now.
That's right.
Relating to that,
Exactly.
which is just here.
As far as we know, right, that dog just does not have a mind full of thoughts and, you know, plans.
Yeah,
you know?
and is not doing a whole one up, one down judging thing,
Right.
and all the things that we do that give us a feeling of separation with each other.
Yeah.
So this perspective really bypasses that sense whereby you're much more interested in feeling family-like with someone rather than proving to that person something about yourself,
Yeah.
or trying to get that person to prove something about themselves to you.
Right.
Yeah.
It is so simple.
Yes.
It's so right here.
Yes. Right.
And I remember Trungpa, since we were talking about some of this before, in his Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which for me remains a major classic,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
speaking about the whole idea of spiritual credentials.
Yes.
And one of the things, Catherine, that I gather in your speaking and writing is that just utterly, completely flies out the window where it belongs. You know,
Yes.
there's no such thing as that.
Yeah.
There's only being and your relationship to it.
Yes, right.
Which
Well,
is
I
to
point out
yourself.
in the book, in Passionate Presence, I outline 7 qualities that emerge naturally when one is sitting in this presence.
Yes.
And they're very simple qualities that we all already know in our hearts.
Could you spell those out
Yes,
for the audience?
they are tenderness. You know, everyone understands what tenderness means. Discernment. The awareness becomes sharper because you're not constantly on some personal agenda that has to be gotten for you.
Right.
Embodiment, which is the recognition that you live in an environment, in an ecosystem. You're an embedded part of that ecosystem. You have a
Yes.
body.
There's a material reality.
There's a material reality, and your feet are on this earth. And as I say in the book, there may be some divinity somewhere else, possibly, but the only one we're going to know is through this body and on this earth. Genuineness or authenticity. Genuineness being the expression of your naturalness, again, without having to do a big presentation. And we love being with people who are genuine, right? I know I do. Yeah. Even if they're wild or crazy or foolish or whatever it is, if they're in their authenticity, they get a pass.
Yes. Sure.
Silence, the quality of silence, which is the silence of the heart, which is the place that is never spoken in any of us. That deep well of silence is one of the things one comes into touch with in this passionate presence. It's there as a quality. You can almost feel it. Delight, quality of delight, which is the current of joy that if you admit it, you feel, right? I mean, usually people are busy reciting their problems, but underneath, everybody loves to be. They still want to be. Almost everybody. Very few people commit suicide. But almost everybody's, when faced with
Beneath the litany.
Yes, when faced with not being at all, they really like being.
Yeah.
And if they'll just admit that a little sooner than being faced with not being, than being faced with death, they would be in touch with this joy that is really ever present. And I don't mean a kind of giddy, silly, Pollyannish thing. I mean just a current of well-being that is saying, oh yeah, it's good to be alive.
Yeah.
Quality of wonder, which knows that we live in a mystery and that the appropriate response to mystery is awe and wonder. And that gives a freshness to our lives. It gives us a sense of innocence. It allows us to live with beginner's mind, as Suzuki Roshi put it.
Yes.
Let's see, I don't know if I've left any out.
Was that 7?
It might have been.
Could I add one?
Yes, add.
Beauty.
Beauty, yes. Well, I actually...
You could say maybe that's been woven in a bit.
I have a
into the
section
awe.
in the delight chapter, in fact,
Oh, yeah? Okay.
called Pervasive Beauty, a subsection called Pervasive Beauty, and it is absolutely an important
Yes,
aspect. And this sense of beauty, when you say pervasive, what it implies is that it's a shift in the perception. It's a shift in the perceiver, rather, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that,
Yes.
for instance, I'll tell a story, a quick
Please.
one. When I first went to be with Punjaji in India, he lived in he's dead now, he lived in a very polluted town, terribly polluted, such that the air was just dark with...
Where in India?
In Lucknow, India, a nondescript town, except that it was very polluted.
And he was there.
And he was there. And outside of his home, there was this mound of garbage covered with warthogs, hairy warthogs, large ones, eating the garbage. And, you know, when you're in this darkened, polluted atmosphere, and you're hearing the snorts of these warthogs crawling over garbage. I mean, it was like a vision of hell, you know.
Yeah.
And at first when I went there...
Inferno.
Yes, it was. And at first when I went there, I almost felt nauseous, you know, just looking at all this
Yeah.
stuff and smelling it. And after I had gone there and I was interviewing him the first week I was there, after our first 2-hour session of one-on-one interview, I walked out of his place and the world looked different. And the warthogs looked beautiful, and I was thinking, I bet warthogs look really beautiful to each other. I bet a male warthog looks great to a female warthog. And the fact that they were eating the garbage was no problem. I was happy for them that they had the garbage there to eat, and it had all lightened up in a very strong way. Again, it was this sense of, instead of a resistance and feeling things as alien, it was a sense of feeling it as one's own. You know, just
Yes.
it all just felt an extended sense of being. So in this way, I speak about pervasive beauty in the book, that it's a shift in the perceiver, right?
Yeah. What a great and graphic story. Because if you could shift that much,
Right.
you know
Yes.
something great was going on.
Yes,
you
well,
know.
there was something great going
That
on in that
is
room, yes.
Fabulous. You know, that's really graphic. Sure, that's right. Pervasive beauty. I mean, I think a human naturally tends toward the appreciation of and being ensconced in beauty.
Yes, and
when he or she wakes up a bit to the order of things, if
Yes.
you will, the beautiful natural order. And,
Oh, I think that's
and I'll
true.
tell you, maybe there's even a 9th. You don't mind if I make a recommendation or two,
please,
okay?
yes.
Maybe we'll co-author a book
Yes.
and a few more. You know. Humor.
Yes.
You know, when I'm more wakeful,
Yes.
I see the inherent humor in the whole setup.
Oh.
Both the human and the ordinary natural world.
Yes,
You
absolutely.
know, there's just great comic relief wherever
There
you
is,
look.
yes, yes. And you become much more childlike. Not
Yeah,
childish, but
right.
childlike in that understanding. And things
Yeah.
are, funnier. Now, it is not to deny the suffering of the world at all. There is tremendous suffering in this world. And if you're not noticing it, you're not paying attention.
Fast asleep.
Yes, yes. And so to hold all of that and let it wash through as the play of existence, to know that yes, it hurts to lose the loved ones. Yes, it hurts to see the cruelty
Yeah.
of humans with themselves and every other creature on earth.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that breaks one's heart over and over again. To the degree you let that in and wash through is the same degree that you can feel the joy as well. If you're blocking it out on one end, you're not going to feel it on the other. And you can play it safe and wear your armor and not feel much at all and be just kind of like in some neutral ground.
Or insulated.
Insulated somehow, yes, you can insulate, or be an ostrich. But if you want to really play it in a rich way,
Yes.
and you need a courageous heart to do it because you feel a lot.
Yes.
You feel so much. Then you're on this big spectrum of feeling the intensity of the suffering, the intensity of the joy. Tears come easily and quickly, pass quickly.
And that's a function of authenticity and
Yeah.
genuineness,
Yes,
really.
absolutely.
You know?
Yes, it is.
You, Catherine, have very beautifully segued into the next question that I really wanted to bring up here to you, which is, what is the relationship, and it's funny because I know you've been a social activist in many ways in your life. Now that you are doing what you're doing the Dharma dialogues and all, and
Yes.
I had such a wonderful time with you that night at Tibet House. It was just very beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And also rich with humor. So I thank you. There is so much suffering, and I'd like to kind of just frame it, if I could, in this way. Mm-hmm. We live next door to each other, and the person next door is very loud and vexatious.
Yes.
And pollutes the water that is then going into my home, and fouls the air, and disrupts the soil. So my tomato plants can't grow properly.
Yes.
They don't have the right sweet taste.
Yes.
And in short, my life is now experiencing the suffering because it happens that my neighbor is going through this himself because of the torturedness, let's say, of his own mind.
Right, yes.
And yet, I'm going to expand that micro picture to the macro.
Yes.
And so we have a planet that's very beautiful,
Yes.
that we love and are, as you
Yes.
so beautifully put.
Yes.
We are our planet, we are our world.
Yeah.
And yet we see elements, others destroying it, literally destroying the ecosystem, not to mention other humans and other sentient beings. What is the role of someone who is more awake in dealing with that reality?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one element of it is to see the way in which we also collude, that each of our lives has got an eco price tag on it as well, and to be very vigilant about treading as lightly as possible, even though frankly, living in America, it's very difficult to not be using resources in a disproportionate way to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. But we can at least have it in our awareness and try our best to model, as Gandhi put it, model the change you want to see, be the change you want to see. So that's the first part. And the second part, I would say, is that we have to come from understanding first. You know, you're only going to have an appeal to somebody who you perceive to be in ignorance if you have some understanding of the person and have some way of conversing with the person. You can't do it just by violence. You can't just beat them into submission. We don't live in a world where that's any longer possible, as we're seeing so clearly on the political stage. So it's a Gandhian principle, and it works for the most part. It may not always perfectly work, but for the most part it works. That if I come to you as a friend, and I appeal to you as a friend first, with understanding, you're going to be a lot more likely to listen to what I have to say.
I agree. That's right. There's a human heart inside everyone.
Yes, exactly, yes.
You know,
and there may be times when you just simply have to stop someone by any means possible.
Yeah.
There may be those times,
Yeah.
but it's good to have exhausted all of the other gentle ways first.
And just in terms of, just out with it, like really political activism in one way or another.
Yes.
And it could be that the pen is stronger than the sword.
Yes.
It could be any number of ways. Are these things that in your heart and your experience really have value?
Absolutely.
And make a contribution?
Oh yes, very definitely. And especially if they can be informed with this understanding that we're speaking about here.
Yes.
Then they're very effective.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
It's very good to hear, because as we know, so many people on a spiritual path, as it's called,
Yes.
feel that they can sort of deny the world and material existence
Right.
in exchange for some kind of divine experience that puts all of this away.
Right.
And
No.
yet this is our world, one of your points of embodiment.
Yes.
We're embodied. Let's
Yes.
use it and enjoy.
Yes, and honor it and respect it.
Honor and respect it.
Yes.
Well, talking about honoring and respecting, I want to just thank you.
Oh, thank
so
you,
much.
Mitchell. It was a
Absolutely.
pleasure.
Good to have you here. You're doing beautiful work, and I just want to help support that as it travels around the world.
And you as well. You're doing very beautiful work.
Thank you so much. Wow. I hope you're awakened and turned on as I am. This was very beautiful. Well, my name is Mitchell J. Rabin. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.